Chapter 4. The sweet spot. All good things in moderation. We all think and assume that more is better, but unintended consequences can arise in a complex system. However, in our complex world, everything of consequence follows an inverted U-curve. Daniel M. Fatovich. Nothing in excess. Delphic Maxim 38. The straight path. This involves discovering the midpoint temperament of each and every trait that man possesses within his personality. This refers to the trait which is equidistant from either of the extremes without being close to either of them. This path is the path of the wise. Every man whose traits are intermediate and equally balanced can be called a wise man. Maimonides. When I was a mathematics student, I was fascinated by the equations that might explain the curves and shapes found in nature. Take a very simple example. A line in two-dimensional space. All you need to know are the coordinates of 2 points in a plane, and this suffices to then identify the function that will join these 2 points. A line. Of course, not all curves and shapes in nature are as simple and regular as a line or a circle. Imagine the contours of a country's borders on a map, or the structures of a Romanesco cauliflower. What are the functional forms that might generate such complex and irregular patterns? This was solved by Benoit Mandelbrot, a French-American mathematician who pioneered the field of fractals and fractal geometry. A fractal is a self-replicating algorithm that produces the same pattern across different scales, which can then model countless phenomena in nature. The beauty of fractals is that a simple process of self-replication yields such complex patterns. Furthermore, fractals can be used to explain countless phenomena, be it in cell biology, botany, medicine, geography, graphic design, computer graphics, image compression, climate science, architecture, or art, among many other disciplines. I love fractals because they cater to the way my mind operates. I am always seeking to unify knowledge across disparate domains. This is perhaps why I was astonished when I recently heard of Benford's Law on a Netflix documentary series titled Connected, hosted by Latif Nasser. The premise of the show is identifying connections between otherwise seemingly unrelated phenomena. Or, as the late Harvard biologist E.O. Wilson would say, finding consilience. Benford's law stipulates that if you look at a numerical data set, the distribution of leading digits, the first digit of a given number will follow a very specific, non-uniform distribution. Positive numbers can start with one of 9 digits, 1 through 9. So a uniform distribution would suggest that all 9 digits have an equal probability of occurring, 11, 1%. But it turns out that the probability expressed as percentages for 1 through 9 are respectively 30, 1, 17, 6, 12, 5, 9, 7, 7, 9, 6, 7, 5, 8, 5, 1, and 4, 6. These add up to 100. Not only is this a mind-blowing set of percentages, but it replicates across a dizzyingly broad and unrelated number of areas. For example, if you list your Facebook friends with the number of friends they have, the first digit of that data set will follow Benford's law. It is a form of mathematical sorcery. Benford's law has been applied in many disparate contexts, including to detect financial fraud, such as tax evasion, and anomalies in electoral data. Both Mandelbrot's fractal geometry and Benford's law speak to how elegantly simple algorithms can explain complex phenomena. Thanks for watching. Is there an equally elegant equation, or rule, or law to explain how human beings can experience optimal living, flourishing, and happiness? In the wisdom of the ancients, there are several worthy contenders, including the Golden Rule, which states, "Do unto others as you would have them do unto you." But for me, Aristotle hit the mark squarely on the head when he established the rule of the golden mean in Book 2 of the Nicomachean Ethics. The golden mean is the sweet spot between two extremes. Take, for example, the virtue of courage. It is the mean between cowardice, deficiency of courage, and recklessness, excess of courage. The golden mean can be applied to a great many things, and is captured by the maxim, all good things in moderation, or what has more recently been dubbed as the too much of a good thing effect. Mathematically, this is known as an inverted U-curve, since it captures pictorially this powerful insight. Aristotle's insight has been espoused by other historical thinkers in widely disparate cultures. Buddha's middle way is about striking the right balance between self-denial and self-indulgence. It also applies to the ontological middle ground regarding what happens to individuals once they are deceased. Something between eternalism. An individual has an eternal and invariant essence, and annihilationism. An individual ceases to exist, in Confucius. The doctrine of the mean. One finds the following passage too. 1. Jung said the superior man embodies the course of the mean. The mean man acts contrary to the course of the mean. 2. The superior man's embodying the course of the mean is because he is a superior man, and so always maintains the mean. The mean man's acting contrary to the course of the mean is because he is a mean man and has no caution. 3. The Master said, "Perfect is the virtue which is according to the mean. Rare have they long been among the people who could practice it." Le juste milieu, the happy medium, is a French term that colloquially refers to someone who exhibits due temperance in modulating their behavior. It also has been used to describe movements in the arts or in architecture. Most notably, it has been used to capture the moderation of centrist political philosophies in governmental actions, especially around the time of the French Revolution. The 7 deadly sins, as enumerated in Catholic theology for well more than a millennium and a half, serve as a warning against our proclivity to stray from the sweet spot, either by succumbing to apathy, sloth, or intemperance, greed, lust, gluttony. Somewhere between these two extremes lies the sweet spot, where we can live a life in accordance with the 4 cardinal virtues of prudence, justice, fortitude, and temperance. Individual sins could also be construed via the prism of the inverted U curve. Take, for example, lust. It is the hyperactivation of the mating drive. For a married couple, lust can lead to infidelity, but a hypoactivation of the mating drive is clearly suboptimal as well. A sexually loveless marriage is not a happy medium. Empirical science tells us that people in relationships enjoy the maximal well-being benefits of sexual intercourse if they engage in it once a week. In other words, there is a curvilinear relationship between sexual frequency and well-being. The inverted U curve is arguably one of the most prevalent patterns in well-being. Its explanatory power extends to phenomena at the macro, individual, and neuronal levels. It is operational in countless domains, including in defining one's optimal personality traits. Take, for example, perfectionism. If one is lacking any perfectionist bent, one will lack the necessary attention to details that constitutes an important element of the creative process. On the other hand, if one is too perfectionist, I suffer from maladaptive perfectionism. One will spend an inordinate amount of time rechecking one's work rather than advancing it. Somewhere between apathetic nonchalance and maladaptive perfectionism lies the sweet spot that I recognize that I possess a frailty in my personality. Maladaptive perfectionism speaks to the importance of having self-awareness, including the capacity to engage in self-criticism. But, as should be evident by now, the inverted U captures the optimal level of healthy self-criticism, be it at the individual or collective levels. Somewhere between self-loathing and egotistical grandiosity lies the optimal sweet spot. You can be self-reflective about your failings as an individual, without presuming that you are a vile manifestation of human filth. You can be self-reflective as a society about past or current injustices, without proclaiming that you are loathsome by virtue of your skin's hue. White. The progressive civilizational self-flagellation that is condoned by the woke is in the diminishing part of the self-criticism curve. To reiterate, the inverted U curve is prevalent in a broad range of domains, including in peak performance, at work or in athletic training, advertising, psychology, economics, politics, management, consumer behavior, and parenting, among others. The optimal functioning of human brains and bodies, companies, economic systems, and political systems are all under the purview of the inverted U curve. The maxim, "all good things in moderation," is truly a universal law of life. Peak performance. The Yerkes-Dodson law has been around since 1908. It posits an inverted U relationship between individuals' arousal states, such as feelings of stress or pressure, and their performance on a given task. Too little stress will result in too little focus on the task at hand, whereas too much stress can be stultifying. There is a sweet spot of arousal that allows an individual to maximize his performance. This is a law that has become enshrined in sports psychology for obvious reasons. There is some optimal arousal sweet spot that will yield maximal athletic performance. Beyond peak athletic performance, the inverted U shape explains the maximal health, cognitive, and affective benefits reaped as a function of exercise intensity. This is known as a dose-response curve. For example, health guidelines from medical associations recommend a moderate level of exercise intensity for maximal benefits. Peter War, who specializes in the study of work psychology, has introduced the vitamin metaphor in explaining the effect of various predictors of happiness. Some vitamins, such as vitamin C and E, follow an asymptotic relationship, whereby consuming a greater dosage is beneficial up to a point, with any additional dosage yielding no additional benefits, but no detrimental effects. On the other hand, vitamins and D follow the inverted U model, whereby increased dosage is good up to a point, and then one enters the detrimental region of the curve at very high doses. More generally, hormesis is a concept that captures the relationship between drug dosage and its reward value. And it turns out that in many pharmacological settings, the dose-response curve follows the inverted U pattern. Robert Sapolsky is a brilliant neuroendocrinologist whose online Stanford lectures are some of the most viewed of any professor. I first became acquainted with his work via his 1994 book, Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers. Sapolsky argued that zebras and other prey animals experience momentary stress, which triggers a flight mechanism. In other words, the zebra does not suffer from prolonged bouts of long-lasting stress. A zebra realizes that it is permanently surrounded by endless dangerous predators, but it goes about its life void of existential angst. Only when it needs to flee from predators does its stress response kick in. Humans, on the other hand, do experience persistent and enduring stress levels. This has many negative health consequences. The optimal response curve of stress, not surprisingly, is an inverted U curve. Too little stress or too much stress is not good for us, a finding confirmed by Sapolsky in a 2015 paper. I recently explained this principle to my very young son when he approached me with an enduring level of stress regarding an upcoming quiz. I explained to him that a moderate level of stress is good, because if you experience no stress at the thought of the looming quiz, you are likely to forego studying. On the other hand, if you suffer from prolonged and paralyzing fear, this could affect your ability to perform well on the test. A sweet spot of stress is indeed what the doctor ordered. The inverted U curve has been documented across many brain studies, including the relationship between brain activity and behavioral performance. Moderate activity is optimal. A broad range of dose effect curves in learning, memory, and cognitive control. For example, moderate dopamine levels yield optimal cognitive function. And the relationship between neural mechanisms, activity patterns in specific regions of the brain, and the optimal functionality of specific mental features, such as self-awareness. The average is good maxim applies to our brains. One melody creatress, the creativity-inducing malady refers to mental psychopathologies that can actually engender creative output. Think of the mad genius archetype, namely the painter, novelist, musical composer, or scientist who produces great works of creativity during a bout of mental illness or mania. That said, the research on finding links between creativity and psychopathology has yielded mixed results, and some have argued that the conflicting findings might stem from an inverted U relationship between the two constructs. In other words, an extremely reasonable, sane person might lack the out-of-the-box thinking that is required for bold creativity, whereas severe mental illness becomes too debilitating for any creativity whatsoever and is simply self-destructive. There is a sweet spot where one's creative juices are maximized without sacrificing one's sanity. On a related note, researchers have uncovered a so-called intermediate effect in the clinical practice of medicine. Junior medical students, senior medical students, and neurologists were asked to read clinical cases, offer a diagnosis, and then recall the details of the case as well as the pathophysiological explanations. Whereas the diagnostic accuracy was greatest for the neurologist, the senior medical students exhibited the so-called intermediate effect. They recalled more of the information and offered richer explanations than the two other groups. In the case of the novice students, they did not have enough knowledge to recall and generate rich clinical information. Whereas for the neurologist, their knowledge was encapsulated into organized schemas, a form of informational pruning. When it comes to tracking scientists' most important works throughout their careers, what is the general pattern? Does their best work take place during their early years, when they possess the greatest amount of vigor and energy? Or, perhaps, late in their careers, when they have had a chance to build many decades of cumulative knowledge? It turns out that across several biomedical fields, the relationship between a scientist's best work and his age follows the now expected inverted U shape. Repetition effects and optimal fear. One of the most powerful findings in advertising is the so-called repetition effect. How many times should an advertiser repeat a message as part of an advertising campaign? Not surprisingly, this effect is best described via an inverted U curve. If you show the advertisement too few times, the target audience will not learn all it is required about your message. On the other hand, if the advertisement is shown too many times, consumers will react negatively toward the ad, if not the advertised brand. There is a sweet spot which, when exceeded, leads to diminishing returns. To spend more money on an advertising campaign beyond the sweet spot is counterproductive, both monetarily and in terms of other measures of efficacy. This inverted U-curve has even been documented in the way that people evaluate risk. Warning someone about risk over and over again can be counterproductive. More is not always better, because repeated warnings can sometimes sound like the boy who cried wolf. So, if you're trying to scare someone into corrective behavior, say with a public service announcement about the dangers of smoking, or leading a sedentary lifestyle, or drinking and driving, how much fear is maximally persuasive? Advertising and communication researchers refer to these types of messages as fear appeals. Some researchers have argued that the inverted U-curve applies here. If you do not sufficiently scare someone, they might not pay attention to the message. And if you scare them too much, it might lead them to a fatalistic acceptance of their fate. There is a moderate amount of fear that is maximally persuasive in leading to behavioral change. During the COVID-19 pandemic, we again saw the utility of the inverted U-curve. To take no precautions at all was a mistake in the face of a highly contagious novel virus. But to become a shut-in, fearful of appearing in public, clinging to a mask as a safety blanket, was also clearly not conducive to one's mental or physical well-being. Fear can prompt beneficial adaptive behaviors, but only within a modulated range. Psychology. The ubiquity of the inverted U-curve is found in many areas of psychology. The psychologists Adam Grant and Barry Schwartz reviewed some surprising contexts wherein the inverted U occurs, including between optimism and well-being, self-esteem and health, volunteering and well-being, organizational commitment and whistleblowing, and empathy and distress. The last example is one that I have personally witnessed with my eldest child. Her empathy is so extreme that it will often cause her debilitating distress. Whenever we come across a depiction of hardship as experienced by a third party, she will repeatedly ask, "Is she sad?" The only response that we can offer to end the ruminative question is no. Any other answer will send her into an infinite abyss of angst. Whenever I wish to tease her, I will say something to the effect of, "Oh, look at that individual, animal, inanimate object. I'm sure that they are sad." The rest of the family will usually crack up laughing and brace for the same one-question onslaught. While my daughter's stress is relatively easily assuaged, most people cannot as easily brush off their daily stressors. Fast pace of modern life is a source of great stress to millions of people. One remedy to address this corrosive reality is to engage in a broad range of mindfulness practices, meditation, breathing techniques, and so on, that have been shown to have many psychological and physical benefits. However, even something as beneficial as mindfulness obeys the inverted U-curve. Too much mindfulness can lead to negative outcomes, including increased anxiety, depression, social avoidance, disassociation, and depersonalization, among other unfavorable downstream effects. Going for a weekend silent retreat might be a wonderful idea. Doing so for a decade might be a terrible idea, as humans flourish in communicative sociality. Too much of anything, even a good thing, can become detrimental. The humanist psychologist Abraham Maslow proposed 5 levels of hierarchical needs to explain the key drivers of human motivation, the third of which is the love and belongingness need. An individual who succeeds in meeting this need is likely to be popular within key social circles. Being popular usually implies that you possess certain desirable qualities, be it that you are fun, good-looking, or extroverted. Hence, all other things being equal, someone with a large network of friends might be viewed more favorably than one with a small network.
But is there an inflection point where having too many friends becomes detrimental to how people perceive you?
A study sought to examine how a person's number of Facebook friends affected their perceived social attractiveness. Researchers created 5 Facebook profiles that varied in the number of friends that were associated to each profile: 102, 302, 502, 702, or 902 friends. The relationship between number of Facebook friends and perceived social attractiveness follows the inverted U-curve such that the profile with 302 friends yielded the highest ratings. I definitely need to go back and cull some of my friends from my personal Facebook page, as my current total stands at a suboptimal 719 friends. The inverted U-shape is also operative within key relationship dynamics. Suppose that you are out on a first date. Your date is wearing a beautiful dress that accentuates her beauty. If you fail to sufficiently compliment her, it might come across as inattentive. On the other hand, if you spend much of the night gushing about how beautiful your date is, she will likely be turned off by your incessant complimenting, reading it as either inauthentic or desperate. Somewhere between lack of interest and obsessive groveling lies the sweet spot. There's also the question of romantic jealousy, a ubiquitous emotion. Even the most secure and self-confident individuals in a marriage might occasionally experience feelings of jealousy, worried about a spouse's other friendships. Naturally, however, romantic jealousy follows the inverted U curve. If you never express any jealousy, this might serve as a diagnostic signal that you do not care enough about your partner. This is precisely why some individuals will willfully seek to trigger a jealous response from their partners as a means of feeling loved and desired. On the other hand, too much jealousy is deeply destructive. It is a telltale sign of mistrust in the relationship, or insecurity in one's self-worth, and will on many occasions result in the dissolution of a marriage, because, for instance, the pathologically jealous individual becomes too controlling, or even abusive. Somewhere between no jealousy and obsessive jealousy lies the sweet spot of how to express one's caring for his or her spouse. I end this section with an exploration of the psychology of aesthetic appreciation. The Wundt curve, named after the father of experimental psychology, Wilhelm Wundt, is a psychophysics phenomenon that postulates that the extent to which we enjoy a stimulus depends on its intensity, with a moderate intensity level being the preferred modality. This inverted U-curve has subsequently been used in a variety of psychological contexts, including by Daniel Berlin's psychobiological theory of aesthetic preferences, which posits an inverted U-curve between the familiarity of a stimulus and the complexity of a stimulus, and how much it is liked. There is a moderate level of familiarity or complexity that is optimal when it comes to aesthetic preferences. This theory has been tested for varied aesthetic judgments, including musical preferences. An analysis of 57 studies from 1901 to 2015 that have examined the inverted U-curve of musical preferences found that it held true in 87% of the studies. 50 out of 57. Parenting and mentoring. I recently held a chat on my show with Yale Law School professor Amy Chua, whose book, Battle Hymn of the Tiger Mother, was a New York Times bestseller back in 2011. In it, Amy espouses a strict parenting style to ensure children's success. Many Asian parents follow this model, as do Jewish parents, regarding their children's pursuit of academic excellence. But as you might guess by now, the scientific data show that an intermediate style, somewhere between being an overbearing, obsessive helicopter parent on the one hand, and being a laissez-faire, kids deserve their independence parent on the other, is in many cases the best approach. As was documented in a study exploring children's academic achievement in terms of the grades they achieved and the extent of parents' supervision over their children. The highest grade point averages corresponded to the children who received an intermediate level of supervision. As a professor, one of my responsibilities is to train the next generation of academics within my areas of expertise. As part of this, I supervise graduate students' theses and dissertations. The mentorship can be a very rewarding part of my job, but it is also extraordinarily time-consuming. One of the challenges of a good supervisor is to know how to strike the right balance in terms of the amount of independence to grant one's students. If you grant too much independence, they are often sucked into a black hole of unproductivity, as they can get lost in unorganized or misdirected research. Many students become rudderless because they have never been expected to exhibit intellectual entrepreneurship on this scale. On the other hand, if you grant the students little to no independence, they never learn to fend for themselves. They become dependent on you to serve as the driving engine of their progress. The sweet spot lies between disengaged non-guidance and overbearing mentorship. Economics and politics. To reiterate, the inverted U-curve is found across a very broad range of economic phenomena. Simon Kuznets, the 1971 laureate of the Nobel Memorial Prize in Economic Sciences, proposed an inverted U-curve to explain the relationship between a nation's level of economic growth, as measured by income per capita, and its income inequality. In this case, the peak income inequality takes place at a moderate level of economic growth. Hence, one needs to avoid that sweet spot. Interestingly, the relationship between income inequality and happiness follows an inverted U-shape as well. Specifically, people are happiest in countries where there is an intermediate level of income inequality. The environmental Kuznets curve posits that the relationship between economic growth and environmental degradation also follows an inverted U relationship. As a nation first expands its economic activity, there is a negative effect on the environment. But eventually, an inflection point is reached, whereby greater economic growth leads to reduced environmental deterioration. The relationship between competition and innovation also adheres to an inverted U-shape. Think of a monopolistic industry ruled by a single firm. The lack of competition reduces incentives to innovate. A highly competitive environment, however, might also reduce innovation because it is seen as too risky. The relationship between intellectual property protection and innovation also follows an inverted U-curve. As with economics, so too with politics. It turns out that the extent to which people involve themselves in politics is highly dependent on the extent to which people have confidence in the political and economic system. Across data from 50 countries, an inverted U relationship was found between confidence in the system and political engagement. If you have no confidence in the system, there is no point in your political involvement. But, similarly, if you have very high confidence in the system, you might assume it will take care of itself, and that it will auto-correct any flaws or mistakes without your involvement. There is some intermediate level of confidence in the system that yields the maximal level of political engagement in terms of voting and other political activity. It might be no surprise that moderate temperatures have their advantages, but studies comparing crime rates to ambient temperature have found that there are more violent crimes at intermediate temperatures than at cooler or hotter ones. At the same time, our ability to learn and retain information is optimal when it is neither too cold nor too warm. Male participants' performance on a paired association task, learning and recalling a list of word number pairs, was evaluated at one of 5 room temperatures: 52 Fahrenheit, 62 Fahrenheit, 72 Fahrenheit, 82 Fahrenheit, or 92 Fahrenheit. Exactly in line with the inverted U effect, the best performance occurred at the moderate temperature of 72 degrees Fahrenheit. I am typing these words from a neighborhood cafe. For the first time, I had to produce an electronic COVID vaccination passport on my iPhone in order to sit inside. Of course, there are pros and cons to this issue, but it speaks to the optimal level of governmental intrusion that citizens should tolerate. Too little government intervention in the affairs of society, such as restricting law enforcement from arresting violent criminals, leads to anarchy. Too much government intervention results in centrally planned dictatorships, like communism. In government regulation of the economy, there is a great deal of difference between intrusive regulations that dictate when you can open your restaurant's outdoor dining facilities and regulations that prevent corporate fraud. Most of us want a society governed by law and good order, safe streets, and efficient public services that still maintains a large degree of personal freedom. The pursuit of life, liberty, and happiness cannot be achieved if big government is constantly intruding into the minutiae of our daily lives. Good governance is about finding that sweet spot. Management. This raises the question, of course, of how corporate management affects our happiness as workers and managers, consumers and citizens in a capitalist society. The scope of corporate responsibility has radically changed over the past century. Originally, the near sole focus of a corporation was to create products, and in the early stages of mass production, that could lead to adages like Henry Ford's. Any customer can have a car painted any color that he wants, so long as it is black. As corporations grew and became more efficient and could diversify their operations and assembly lines, the production-centric model of the corporation gave way to the marketing-centric model, where customization and differentiation to target markets and consumer demand were key. The third stage of corporate development established an expansive model of corporate social responsibility. Companies were now expected to create products, innovate to meet specialized consumer markets and popular demand, and prove that they were solicitous of the needs of their employees and the environment, setting aside a portion of corporate profits for charitable activities. Finally, we are now in the fourth stage, known as woke capitalism, wherein companies must go beyond social responsibility and adhere to social activism and show their commitment to work on behalf of social justice, as defined in part by leftist Ivy League executives and enforced by placard-wielding blue-haired activists who graduated with women's studies degrees from Wellesley College. Perhaps needless to say, not only do these protesters, noxious propagators of idea pathogens, make many people annoyed and unhappy, but their efforts are in large part counterproductive, at least to the well-being of the corporations they afflict. Several studies in widely different cultures, from France to Japan, have yielded the expected inverted U relationship between corporate environmental investments and economic performance. The same is true of corporate ideological propaganda. Disney and Netflix recently found themselves on the wrong side of the inverted U curve when it came to woke politics, and their stock prices took a hit accordingly. Elon Musk referred to these woke companies as having been infected by a woke mind virus. Many people have suggested to me that Musk must have read The Parasitic Mind, I hope so. In any event, the preliminary data, with admittedly small sample sizes, show that, generally speaking, woke capitalism is less successful than apolitical capitalism, as measured by a recent study of the stock prices of woke companies. Somewhere between the amoral organizational culture depicted in the television series Mad Men and the wokeism of Disney and Netflix lies the optimal sweet spot of being socially responsible, taking care of the environment in which a business operates, without alienating the great majority of your consumers with blue-haired progressive nonsense. In a 2013 study, researchers examined the inverted U-curve in 8 areas of corporate management, including organizational behavior, human resource management, entrepreneurship, and strategic management. The inverted U-curve held true whether it was measuring the relationship between a leader's assertiveness and effectiveness, or an employee's conscientiousness and job performance. It would seem that as both workers and managers, we would all enjoy our work more if we follow the golden mean, consumer behavior. But we are more than workers or managers, we are consumers. Does the inverted U effect have relevance here as well? The answer is, of course. Moderation in eating and drinking, for example, has been recognized as wise for millennia. Now we can support the adages of the past with scientific studies. For example, moderate alcohol consumption is associated with improved cardiorespiratory fitness, reduced cardiovascular disease, and reduced mortality from all causes. Moderate fish consumption has been linked with improved cognitive and academic performance. In some instances, however, the middle ground is not the best ground. Moderate enjoyment of spicy foods, for instance, has been linked to abdominal fat. We often think that greater consumer choice brings happiness, but this is not always the case. I can illustrate this principle by the trauma that confronts me whenever I am about to head off on a trip. I always face the same daunting decision of which book to pick from my sizable personal library to bring along on my voyage. My wife often teases me about the agonizing choice paralysis that I experience as I stare at hundreds of alluring contenders. So much knowledge to consume in so little time. This decisional angst is precisely what the psychologist Barry Schwartz referred to in his book, The Paradox of Choice. Contrary to the classical economic presumption that more choices are always better than fewer, people can become overwhelmed with a deluge of alternatives, and thus experience choice overload and increased post-decisional regret. Choice overload can be detrimental, as demonstrated in a set of 3 studies that explored people's behaviors and responses when choosing between 6 or 24 jams, 6 or 30 chocolates, and writing an essay for extra credit, where the choice of possible topics was 6 or 30. People were more likely to purchase the 2 products and were more satisfied with their final choice when facing fewer alternatives to choose from. And when it came to extra credit, they were likelier to write the essay and performed better on the assignment when given fewer choices among essay topics. When it comes to consumer choices, the inverted U-curve strikes again, showing that most consumers prefer a midpoint between having no choice and a plethora of choices. A broad range of happiness researchers, including economists, neuroscientists, philosophers, and psychologists, have recognized that even when it comes to things we presume to be good, like money, fame, and status, more is not always better when it comes to personal happiness. All things in moderation, including the pursuit of happiness. Science tells us that even happiness should be pursued in moderation, and that the optimal level of happiness follows, at least in certain contexts, the logic of the inverted U-curve. Contrary to one's naive intuition, seeking more happiness is not always better. A constant striving for greater happiness can lead to such detrimental behaviors as excessive risk-taking. Beyond demonstrating that more happiness is not always better, psychologists have demonstrated that there are contexts where too much happiness can increase one's gullibility, and that an excessive, willful pursuit of happiness can result in greater loneliness. As is true for most things in life, temperance and moderation, even in the pursuit of something as positive as happiness. I end this chapter by quoting Aristotle from the Nicomachean Ethics. For instance, it is possible to feel fear, confidence, desire, anger, pity, and generally to be affected pleasantly and painfully, either too much or too little. In either case, wrongly, but to be thus affected at the right times, and on the right occasions, and towards the right persons, and with the right object, and in the right fashion, is the mean course and the best course, and these are characteristics of virtue. If I were to add to Aristotle's brilliant edict, I would posit that life requires the proper modulation of our personality traits, drives, and pursuits, as well as of our cognitive and emotional responses. The degree and type of moderation we should pursue will depend on our age, circumstances, and personality. and the desire to achieve moderation varies across individuals, as captured by the preference for moderation scale. But what is unequivocally clear is that in almost every aspect of our lives, there exists a golden mean. If you fail to find it, you will misappropriate your time, your efforts, your funds, and your potential for maximal well-being. Everything in moderation is a universal maxim of optimal functioning across all units of analyses, be it neuronal, individual, organizational, economic, or political levels. The place to find your maximal happiness is in the exercise of virtuous moderation.